Namaste and greetings. I, Prankanigi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today, we are gathered here for the day 7 of the EPAYF Environment Policy and Action Youth Fellowship. We welcome you all to this immersive journey into impactful environmental policy and action. The chair for the program is Ms. Bhargavi S. Raoji, independent researcher and educator, environment activist, Bengaluru, and visiting senior fellow, Honorary at IMPRI. Our expert panel for the program today includes Mr. Nityanand Jayaraman ji, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, and Ms. Bhargavi Rao ji. The conveners for this course are Dr. Mansi Bal Bhargav ji, Ms. Suhasini Iyer ji, Professor Utpal Kumar De ji, Dr. Simi Mehta ji, and Dr. Arjun Kumar ji. Proceeding further, we welcome everyone to this transformative journey and appreciate your dedication in investing your time, energy, and commitment to gaining a profound understanding of the crucial role and intricate details of environmental policy and action. We have also shared the course outline and reading resources in your email for your kind perusal. Before we start today's session, I'd like to state the housekeeping announcements. Please join the meeting on time. There will be Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions on the Q&A box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise, and please refrain from making general comments in the questions to save time. To begin today's session, I would like to invite our chair, Ms. Bhargavi Rao ji, to give her opening remarks. We welcome you, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka. It gives me great pleasure as we come to the penultimate day of this wonderful program to share a few remarks before I hand over the forum to our very distinguished speakers of today. It has been a great journey for all of you, starting from understanding what is happening to our natural habitats, landscapes, with the opening talk by Professor Abita Meenwanak. And following that, we had this excellent lectures on participatory governance, on what is happening in the context of climate change, how are our environmental and forest clearances being given, then all issues concerning migration and urbanization. And we also learned a lot on the economy, development, and environmental governance. And then we did talk a little bit about agrobiodiversity and nutritional security in the context of all the farmer protests that's happening in the country. And we did briefly also understand the environment, social, and governance, the so-called ESG of today. Then we had a special session on the World Environment Day, where we understood disaster resilience and all issues surrounding advocacy. And then we covered topics on the rivers, on air pollution, on circular economy, waste management, clean energy, and so much we have learned about. And we learned about laws, we learned about the many campaigns, the people's movements, the struggles. So what is it that we can do as participants of this program, as the youth who are now in charge of the planet that is being handed over to you? And I think in that context, we have two excellent speakers, Nityanand Jayaraman, who comes from an amazing background in action, particularly in coastal Tamil Nadu and neighboring states. What kind of action is necessary today in the context of where all our laws are being diluted and some laws are being dodged, and those who are protesting are going behind bars? So how do we navigate a space like this? And I think he's the best person to speak. And then in this entire struggle, it is the women and children who are suffering the most. And I think in that context, we have Professor Vibhuti Patel. We cannot think of a better person to address that. With all her experience, I think, to understand what is happening in the space of women and children, and how is it that we as participants of this program can do something, can change again, all of this knowledge that we are getting into some kind of action. I think we are at a great point in time to hear both of them and plan your assignments and your own presentations, which are next week. So without wasting another moment, over to Niti. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your remarks. And yes, without any further ado, we'll move on to our first session. And I'm delighted to invite Mr. Nityanand Jayaraman ji, member, Vetiver Collective, writer and researcher based in Chennai. So will be guiding us on the topic Action for Environment. We welcome you, sir, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Bhargavi, for the kind introduction to Mr. Arjun sir and Ms. Priyanka Negi for inviting me to this session. I've been asked to speak about environmental action and what we can do. What I think I will focus on is what we should not be doing, because there's a lot of nonsense that goes on in the name of environmental action, a lot of nonsense that goes on in the name of solutions. So I just wanted to spend a little time to talk about this, the dangers of false solutions, something that most of us are likely to fall into the trap of false solutions, because false solutions are easy solutions. And these are things that we automatically gravitate towards, not because we are bad or we are fraudulent, but because we want to do something good and we want to do it in a hurry. And so I would just like to, slow down things a bit and take you through this short presentation. Just a moment, please. Okay. I hope you can see the presentation. Yeah. So before I get into the presentation, I just wanted to kind of introduce myself. I'm a journalist. I mean, that's what I do. I write for a living, and activism is for the soul. I am part of a voluntary anti-corporate solidarity collective called Vettiver Kootamaipu, or Vettiver Collective, which is based in Chennai. And we work with solution impacted communities. I mean, I call them solution impacted communities because, constantly we are trying to solve problems without understanding what problem it is that needs to be solved. And as a result, our solutions end up hurting people. And the people who are hurt by the solutions of the dominant mainstream society are the people that we as a collective work with. And we extend solidarity of three different kinds. I mean, our solidarity is slow solidarity, which means we are not in a hurry. It is humble solidarity, which means we stay in the background. And it is deep solidarity, which means that we identify things that the community itself might not be able to do, but could use help with, and things that we would be in a good place to provide as assistance. We mobilize science, arts, and law to lend solidarity, and and media to lend solidarity to communities. And there's also an intercultural translation, which means it is not about the dominant way of knowing. So you might have heard a lot about data-based policy making, or evidence-based policy making, science-based policy making. And science is a word that that means a very specific thing. It means Western institutional science. But not everybody makes sense of the world through Western institutional science. There are many, many, many different ways of making sense of the world. And often the different societies or different cultures that make sense of the world in different ways are unable to speak to each other. And one of the attempts that we try to do as a collective is to provide this translation between the dominant Western institutional science and other ways of knowing. So to get into my main topic today, I live in, or used to live in, Chennai along the beach. And my first slide was of the beach of Besant Nagar in Chennai, which is a very hip and happening place. And not a month goes by without a bunch of cool-looking young people coming there and clean up for beach cleanups. Now, the question that one needs to ask is, are they cleaning up or are they dirtying up? Which means after they clean, where does the garbage go? So in 2014 or 15, I don't quite recollect exactly when, but then there was this mission called the Swachh Bharat mission that was announced, and it had this really interesting, Gandhi glasses wearing Gandhi, but there was also, of course, Harry Potter, but there was also the broom on the side, and the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan promised to magically make garbage disappear. Now, the thing is that garbage doesn't disappear anywhere. It moves, it might move from one place to another, but it doesn't really disappear. So most of the time when we're looking at things like beach cleanups or most of what we do under national missions like the Swachh Bharat mission is to move garbage from one place to another. And usually garbage moves from a place where people have power to places where people do not have power. In a society like ours, which is ridden by caste, it moves down the caste ladder, which means it moves from areas where upper caste people live to, or upper caste people value, like the Besant Nagar beach, to places where lower caste people live. So false solution. This is a false solution. So we think we have cleaned up the beach. We think we have cleaned up our city. We think we have cleaned up our country, but we actually have not. We have ended up dirtying up another place. And so that is your first trait of a false solution. False solutions are discriminatory, and these solutions are possible. These quote unquote solutions are possible only in unequal and racist societies, and ours is one such. The second trait of false solutions is that they make an entry as a quick fix during a crisis. First of all, a problem is allowed to grow into a crisis. And once it grows into a crisis, the government or the court will step in and say, now this is a crisis, we need urgent action, do something about it. And when you do that, then automatically a number of different things are brought in order to address, quote unquote, the crisis at hand. We do not diagnose the problem. We do not try and find out what is the root cause of the problem, and therefore we do not take care of the real solutions. And what is told to us is the real solution will come later. Let's deal with this underlying solution now, underlying problem now, and we will then deal with the real solution later. And usually these kinds of efforts are very low intensity. So for instance, I can give you the example of the urban water crisis that many cities and certainly mine faces from time to time. The urban water crisis is a result of bad urban planning, as a result of how we uh, pave over and concretize our water bodies and our open spaces. But then that is not dealt with. So the way we deal with water crisis is to bring in water from distant places, desiccating those areas, making those areas starved of water, and and satisfying or satiating ourselves. The air pollution crisis in places like Delhi, again, give us a lot of insight into false solutions, because they're usually a big trade fair of false solutions. Things like the huge air filters that were proposed to be set up, I don't know whether they were set up, are false solutions. Or the filters that are kept inside, air purifiers inside homes. It means that people who can afford to buy an air filter or air purifier get to breathe clean air, but the problem of air pollution itself has not been addressed. The issue is that real problems are quite complex, and they require difficult answers. And if we are in the pursuit of simple answers, then we are likely to be addressing the wrong problem. And also the other thing is that you don't have universal solutions. You don't have one solution for all the world's problems. Depending on where you are, the kinds of problems will be mediated by your local context. And so your solutions or your interventions would also need to be nuanced. Take the example of plastics. The problem with plastics is that, as a material, I think it's a material that's really wonderful because it gives us a lot of flexibility, a lot of convenience, all those things are there. The problem with plastics is that it is non-degradable, it is toxic, it cannot be burnt safely, buried safely, or thrown or reprocessed in a safe manner. And the challenge is to find the right problem. So now, if you look at it for the last, say, 30 years or so, we've tried to solve the problem of plastics. We've thrown every quote unquote solution that we have at it, but we still haven't solved it. So what that means is that if you have done everything you can to solve it, but you still are not able to solve it, it is not a problem with a solution. It is a problem with a problem. You've defined the problem wrong. You look at it, the annual plastics production is about 400 million tons. About by 2050, we are likely to ramp up our plastic production fourfold to 1,600 million tons. We have produced from the beginning about 7 billion tons till date. And only 9% of the waste that is generated is actually recycled. But despite that, all of us are taught and all of us parrot like idiots that recycling is good. We should all recycle, and recycling is the way to solve the problem. We also talk about how we should carry plastic. We should carry cloth bags. Definitely carry a cloth bag. I don't think that's a wrong thing to do. But to think that carrying a cloth bag is going to solve the problem of plastics has to be delusional, because we're not doing anything about the 400 million tons of plastic that comes into the economy every year, and which is going to be increasing to 1,600 million tons a year from 2050 onwards. So this is my garbage guru, Dr. Paul Connett, once talked to me about this analogy of an overflowing bathtub. So this bathtub was overflowing, and the man was trying to stop the flooding by he took a mug in his hand and started emptying it out into the commode, but that did not stop the flooding, did not stop the overflowing. So he took a bucket and did the same thing, still did not work. Then he stuck in a pump and connected it to the power plant, the nuclear power plant, and tried to pump out the water, but it still did not work. And then his wife walks in and turns off the tap. And there is a lesson in this for the manner in which we deal with, say, plastics, or the way we go about planting trees while doing nothing about the hundreds of thousands of trees that are to be lost, say, in Nicobar, or for this Great Nicobar master plan that the government of India has, or the Hasdeo Aran forest, where coal mining has threatened already thousands of acres of densely forested jungles. So we have one of the reasons why false solutions are particularly attractive is because it gives the impression of having addressed the problem by transferring the problem from one place to another, and that is called externality. And the externality is where I solve my problem by transferring it to you. That's an externality, and usually externalities travel down a hierarchy. And the second is invisibility, which means that in the hierarchy, there are certain places and certain people that are invisible. It is not that they are invisible as such, but in our value system, we believe that those places or those people don't deserve any better. It is totally okay. It is totally okay for a large number of people to live next to a smoldering garbage dump. We do not really find a big problem with that. Even if we do find a big problem with it, we don't find it to be a problem that really disturbs us to the point where we will do something about it. We will be disturbed to see a child engage in open defecation and talk about how bad things are. But we're not disturbed about the fact that all the city's shit ends up in one place. Coming to the root of the problems is the issue of growth. Now, growth is a biological concept. It is borrowed from biology because that's where things grow. So things are born, then they eat and grow, and then they slowly decay and die. When you translate this or transfer this without any critical thought to our economy, then we have a situation, as we do now, that we have an economy that is required to grow. It will consume resources, it will generate waste, but there is no death in sight for this economy. It is expected to grow all the time. And extremely intelligent people assure us that we will continue to grow. The question that needs to be asked is how much can we grow? Because with growth comes consumption of resources and generation of waste. Both the point of consumption, the place where the waste goes to, both of them are colonies. Both of them are areas where people who do not have the political power to resist you reside. So the challenge also is then, how do you sustain or can we sustain indefinite growth? I'll take you to a few examples from my city, Chennai, but I think you can do the same thing in your city as well by looking at Google Earth. Of course, and unfortunately, the government of India has now banned the timeline function in Google Earth, so you can only go up to 2014. Earlier, we used to be able to get up to 2000, so I can get North Korea's 2000 imagery, but I can't get India's 2000 imagery in Google Earth. But here's 2004 imagery from Google Earth for Chennai. On the left-hand side, we have a place called the Pallikarnai marshland, which is the largest, marshy area, the largest water body in the city of Chennai. And what we see on the right-hand side is about 330 acres of that marshland carved out to create the Elcott SEZ. I mean, this, of course, allows the economy to grow. It provides jobs, but it also ends up occupying an extremely important infrastructure, natural infrastructure for the city, which both protects us from heat by moderating the temperature, protects us from floods by serving as a buffer for rainwater, and by recharging our groundwater aquifers and protecting us from water scarcity. This area was then handed over to the ELCOT to create a special economic zone for IT industries. And now we have LEED certified green buildings, climate smart green buildings located inside Chennai's most valuable marshland. And these buildings are occupied, are owned by quote unquote knowledge industry. Tata's, Cognizant, etc., who have built their plants and their facilities inside the marshland in 2015 and again in 2023. These places were very heavily flooded. Well, I wouldn't call it flooded because marshlands don't flood. Marshlands get filled up. And if you build in a marshland, then you get filled up. You don't get flooded. Again, another example. On the left-hand side, we have the original boundary of the Velachery Eri. An Eri is an irrigation tank, a water body. And these water bodies have, in the Tamil revenue records, been classified as Porambok. Porambok as a word refers to communally held lands and waters that are supposed to be used for communal purposes, shared uses, and these are not meant to be built on. But in an economy that believes in private property and valorizes built areas. So when you look at an unbuilt area, we say this area is not developed. But then when you look at a built area, or we say we will develop this area by building on it. So the word development itself has acquired, has brought its positive connotations to the act of building. And so when that is applied to open areas that are meant to be open for everybody's good, like the irrigation tank, what you see is what you have on the right-hand side. You have a completely encroached area, and you have flooded cities. Ditto over here. The reason why I chose this picture is to dispel the notion that it is unplanned urbanization that is at the heart of the urban malaise, like flooding or water scarcity. On the right-hand side, what you see inside the irrigation tank or the lake is an area that is well laid out. And you can see that engineers have been at work, because engineers like straight lines. So you have a well laid out, urban residential area developed inside the lake. This was actually developed with the help of World Bank funds. So you had the brightest minds from Washington, D.C. Doing their quote unquote due diligence and lending money to us. So we have destroyed our city on borrowed money here. So the identification of false solutions are quite simple. So when you have a very, very complex problem, and then you come up with a simple solution. So you often hear people saying, what is India's problem? Corruption is India's problem. You solve corruption and India's problem will be resolved. India has a problem that is extremely complex. It is a problem that is different in a different neighborhood in Delhi, from a different neighborhood in Chennai, from a city to city, from a state to state. The problem is very complex, and a simple solution cannot address a complex problem. The second way of identifying a false solution is to look to answer the question, who gains? And somebody will definitely lose. So this is called the externality. We say, you can't have an omelet without breaking an egg. The question is, whose egg are we breaking, and who gets to eat the omelet? The third way in which you can identify false solutions is that false solutions do nothing to upset the status quo. The status quo is a status quo where an extremely unequal society is the status quo. So if you want to bring in a real solution, a true solution, the true solution must have an element of equalizing. It has to disturb the inequality. It has to disrupt power. It has to question the dominant forces. If it does not do that, then it maintains the status quo, and it is a false solution, which means if what you're doing is not making the people in power uncomfortable, then you can rest assured that you are not on the right track. And finally, techno-fixes, which means issues that might be extremely complex social political issues will be sought to be solved by technology. I'll bring in a new recycling technology. I'll bring in an incinerator to burn your waste. I'm not going to be able to, I'm not going to invest in trying to change our behavior, trying to address our economy, change our economy from an economy that is dependent on growth, which means dependent on consumption, which means dependent on resource exploitation and environmental degradation. I'm not going to try and change that. If I don't try and change that, it means that I'm pursuing a false solution. So I'll end with this last slide. These are just, suggestions, provocations. You don't have to take it seriously. I would seriously and strongly recommend that you don't try and rob a bank. But what it does say is that banks and investments and what we talk about, what we take for granted as the ways in which we have to move forward, might actually be the problem and not the solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a really enlightening presentation. We enjoyed it. And I'd now like to invite Bhargavi ma'am for her remarks on the session. And in the meanwhile, participants, please put your questions in the Q&A box or chat box, or you can also raise hand and we can take them once ma'am's comments are done with. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Thanks, Niti, for awakening all our consciousness. I love the first three words about the organization you work you're associated with: humble, slow, and deep. And I think that is something we all need to imbibe, because as change makers, that humility is gone. Many a time on the field, I have seen many of us who think that we have the solutions because we come from urban areas, we come from an English speaking community, we know a little bit of science, we know that we have solutions, and then the traditional and indigenous knowledge is completely disregarded. So I think being humble is something very important, and again slow. And that reminds me of the kind of philanthropies and foundation funding that comes for a 3-year cycle and 5-year cycle, and they want results in 3 years and 5 years. That is it's impossible, because we know that we can't achieve anything in 3 years and 5 years. So looking for a long-term change is something that is very important in this work. And yes, deep engagement, that is also so important, because you just can't go to any place and try and superficially understand something and say, okay, this is the solution, unless we go deeper into the different layers of like Niti just said, at the intersection of caste, class, religion, language, ability, disability. There are so many things, right? So unless we understand all of that, it's impossible to take the right action at the right time. And moving on, I again resonate with the whole evidence-based, science-based impact that happens today, where a lot of the local people who don't speak the dominant language are completely disregarded. And how a translation, first of all, is so important. Translation of every little document, not only in terms of helping them understand, but understanding the knowledge that is there in the community. Translating that back to English is another very important aspect of what you mentioned. And yes, all the false solutions. I'm sure each of us, if you ask our participants to type a false solution in the chat box, there will be so many that all of them can think of. And particularly on the Environment Day, many people just go around planting trees or cleaning up parks and beaches and rivers. But at the end of it, you don't know where to go, what to do with it. It's just a feel-good exercise. And today it's also become a very corporate exercise, where that one day you wake up to this environment kind of a thing. You have so many days in the year, and particular days you just wake up to it and do something and take pictures and put it on social media. That's become the norm, and that needs to break. But that also reminds me of something that we had done from Environment Support Group many years ago. This was in 2004. It was on March 14th. It was the day of action against pollution and dam building on rivers. And Kaveri, as we all know, is just about 100 kilometers away from Bangalore, where we get the water for Bangalore. So we had done a little action. We did clean up the banks of the river, but at the end of it, we dumped it all in the forest department. And because it was under the jurisdiction of the forest department, told the forest department that they really have to do something about it, and followed it up until they put some systems in place. But that again was not the great solution, but at least something got done there. So that reminded me of that. And something that you mentioned about how garbage moves is something that is happening across all our cities. And it just moves away from our sight. It becomes invisible, and then we don't have to worry about it. Out of sight is out of mind. Across the cities, all the landfill affected communities are predominantly the lower caste, lower class, not the dominant religions. And we completely forget about what they are suffering in the context of how leachates enter their water bodies, and they have to drink that dirty water. Their children fall sick, their animals fall sick, their livelihoods are at stake. And in the case of Bangalore, it was one such Dalit village which woke up to this whole thing and said, stop bringing your garbage here to our little village. We ourselves don't generate any plastic here. In fact, even today, it is just about, as a crow flies, it's about 8 kilometers from the international airport. But even today, you will not find a single shop where you will get a biscuit packet or a pound of bread or anything like that which comes in plastic. It is a small Dalit village. They just grow some ragi or very little paddy, their vegetables, and they rear their animals, and that's how they lived all their life. And all of Bangalore's waste was going there since 2000. And sometime in 2003, they just woke up to it, and they said, stop bringing all your garbage here, put it in the center of the city, put it in the palace grounds, which is in the center of the city. They even said, take it to Electronic City, because all the waste seems to be coming from there. And they have been fighting a battle from 2000 till today. The case is still going on, but they've got some relief. At least the landfills have been shut down. 2 landfills have been shut down. They are now asking that the entire legacy waste that is sitting there be bio-mined out. So again, talking about science and, the communities who we think are not educated, they don't know anything, no literacy. It took a village like that to hold a mirror to Bangalore, and Bangalore boasts of all the science, and we've not got one thing right. Just like Chennai, we've made sure all our leaks disappear, or they are encroached, or they are dumped with sewage and garbage. And then we've not got our waste management right. We have landfills even today all around Bangalore, where communities continue to suffer. And then our urban planning, with all the science of urban planning, we've not got our planning right. We've not got one thing right with all the science, whereas communities have been living in this landscape for thousands of years, and they have not faced these kind of problems. So that is another thing that we all need to really think of. And yes, the quick fixes again remind me of, and you gave a good example of air pollution a few years back when this whole air pollution work started across all our cities. We knew what the problem was. We knew what needs to be done, but everybody bought time saying, oh, we need to have measurements in place. So now we are measuring air pollution on every building across the city. And then we have mobile monitors, we have personal monitors. People are walking around with these personal monitors. Yes, data is important, but we haven't done anything about emissions as such. We haven't done anything about all the construction dust that is coming from the crazy construction, the irrational construction that's happening in all our cities. And then city after city is investing on all these scrubbers, purifiers, filters, so on and so forth. But I'm not addressing the real problems, and I think people need to really wake up to it and understand what solution will truly work locally. And that's again something Niti very beautifully mentioned, that not a one-size-fits-all approach is just not right. And he did speak about the plastic issue, which is too complex. And yes, the kind of campaigns that I am seeing again is about saying no to a plastic bag, just carrying a cotton bag. All that is great. These are examples that we can also draw from our own ancestors, but we definitely need to address the larger issue. Yes, we need plastic today. If you're stripped onto a bed on the ICU, if it is not for plastic, none of us will survive. But on the other hand, the kind of plastic production is happening, that is something that needs to be addressed. And the overflowing bathtub is a great example for all of that. And again, something that really caught me about this was about the whole growth. How the term has been taken from biology, and wherein biological growth there is, birth and death, whereas in an economical growth, there is unstoppable birth that is happening, and that is landing up with all the kinds of waste. And moving on, he just showed those fantastic slides about how city after city, it's the same picture if you all see, like he said, on Google Earth about your own cities from wherever you all are, listening to these sessions, how lakes, the commons, the grazing pastures have been diverted to these SEZs and various other industrial projects, and now airports and expressways, you name it, and it will, these are the kind of projects that are taking birth. And again, we talk about buildings being climate smart, projects being climate smart, and this whole term that is being given to everything. So for example, airports are called greenfield airports and brownfield airports. So the greenfield airport suddenly will give you an impression that, okay, something is very green about it. There is absolutely nothing green about it when you try and understand what a greenfield airport is. So these kind of terminologies also kind of kind of greenwash the whole thing. I think again, some great examples that you gave, Niti, about the omelette and the egg. Yes, whose egg at the end of the day? Who's going to enjoy the omelette, and what are the additions on the omelette, and who's taken care to even make sure the eggs are there, and who's been snatched of that egg is something that we need to think of on a daily basis, because everything that we seem to enjoy today is coming at a huge cost of our local community somewhere being displaced, being ripped off their place of livelihood, and left without skills to move on in life. And this is the kind of development that is happening. And yes, so how do you engage with these issues? How do you engage with the kind of inequalities? And this disparity is only growing across the country and the world. And how do you question power? And yes, for everything there is a tech answer today. And all our cities are coming out with climate action plans. So if you just go through some of these climate action plans, it's all tech-based solutions. The poor street vendor or the solid waste worker who's bearing the brunt of the heat and the rain and flooding and all that, they don't have access to tech, and they won't be able to get any solution from these tech-based solutions. So that is something we all really need to think when we are thinking of solutions. And the last slide again was simply fantastic about redefining expertise, retelling history. Yes, today everybody is an expert, but those who really hold the knowledge from thousands of years, the indigenous communities and the farming communities, all the traditional knowledge, that is completely disregarded. So I think moving forward, we need to keep all these points in mind when we are thinking of any action that we are taking. It will be good to incorporate these ideas into the many assignments that you all have planned. The areas of your assignments definitely have scope to incorporate all these points, and I'm sure it has been a great learning for all of you. So over to you for question and answers. Thank you, Nitin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. As ma'am said, the floor is now open for Q&A, and if anybody has a question, please raise a hand so we can take them in order. Or you can also put it in the chat box or the Q&A box. We'll just wait a couple of minutes and we'll see if any questions arrive. Yes, Neeraj Bhatia, please go ahead. Neeraj, we are not able to hear you. I think there's some technical difficulty on their end.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Right. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Priyanka. Thank you, Mr. Jayaraman. That was a very, deep and insightful presentation on really understanding false solution with regards to, the environment in general. I wanted to bring across a point that I think Ms. Rao also mentioned, regarding climate change and the sort of um, you know budgetary priorities that urban governments, local governments are putting. Recently, I'm sure some of you must be aware, the municipal corporation in Mumbai, BMC, Brinna Mumbai Municipal Corporation, had for the first time released a climate budget report for its current fiscal year of about 10,000 crores, right? And That's obviously an ominous sign, for a city like Mumbai, one of the capitalist cities of India and the world, releasing a budget specifically for climate change. But when you dive a little bit deeper and to understand some of the specific allocations with regards to this 10,000 crores and how it will be spent, um, a big chunk of it, I think 9,700 crores, goes to urban flooding and water resource management. Clearly, everybody's aware that a significant portion of Mumbai is built on sort of reclaimed land, right? And flooding along the sort of coastal Mumbai area will impact a lot of the real estate and other infrastructure, and it's a very sort of a protectionary measure, this budget, for those kind of capital assets. And the remaining allocation, of the 10,000, 9,700 goes to this one particular category of urban flooding and water resource. Waste management gets a fraction, urban greening and biodiversity gets a fraction, air quality management gets a hardly a fraction of a fraction, right? So, my question to you then, Mr. Nityanand, is how can more progressive cities like Mumbai, and I'm assuming that a very progressive, urban population there, then counter a lot of these measures? Because right now, I personally think the releasing of this budget is a bit of a bit of a greenwash, if you like, right? Because it's a very specific budget for the protection of capitalistic assets, and it's not a very diverse budget catering to all climate change. So how can the citizens, especially citizens of more progressive urban cities, go back to their leaders, to their politicians, to their municipalities, to the IS officers, and question them, on these sort of biased allocations of budgeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeraj. Should I take a few more questions or should I answer as I get?
I can just ask if somebody else also wants to ask a question. Please go ahead and then sir can take them together. Just raise your hand if you have a question. All right,
Okay.
sir, I think it's good
So
to.
I will take Mr. Neeraj Bhatia's question. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhatia. The phrase climate change, I'm a bit allergic to because everything seems to hinge upon climate change. Every single problem is reduced to a problem of climate change. My grandmother's arthritis is climate change, and everything will now have to be climate smart. And so all the things that you are doing all along will now have to be done in the name of climate change. So you had your smart cities, and now there'll be climate smart cities. So that's one part of the problem. Second, out of this 10,000 crores, 9,700 crores will go towards urban flooding and water resource management. Now, I don't think that that is something that we need to be concerned about, such a disproportionate budget. The thing is that the 10,000 crores will go into doing exactly what we were doing last year, 20 years ago, which is enriching the fat cats, which is bringing into place these outlandish interventions in the name of solutions. So your question as to what do we need to do? What do people in progressive cities? I think that cities by themselves are not progressive. Within cities, there are people who are, who are more critically minded, more radical, and these people need to have their voices heard, which means the narrative needs to start shifting. Can the city continue to grow? Because you have a city like Bombay that continues at this point of time, after nearly 400 years of intense encroachment, reclamations, and landfilling and whatnot, is continuing to do the same thing. You have your Bandra Worli link, the sea link that has been constructed in a place that is known to be a disaster. It's a powder keg waiting to explode, not waiting to explode. It's been exploding every year during monsoon. We have at least a few days of very intense flooding. So the question is, how do you then start shifting the narrative? There's only so much that can be done by participating in it. And I think we need to participate in the budgetary exercises, in questioning these things, because no forum can be left unattended. So you need to be in all those places, also possibly speaking the language that, might be the language of co-optation. But at the same time, what is being done to create a more of a radical critical space? Who is talking about enough growth in Mumbai? Who's talking about unbuilding the city, about opening up spaces as opposed to increasing the concrete? So I think that we need a larger number of unreasonable people who are ready to be unpopular, to raise issues that might resonate with people, especially in times of crisis. You have, thanks to what we have done over the last so many decades, we have a predictable campaign calendar. So by November in Chennai, by say September, October, we start making noises about flooding. Everybody listens. About 15, 20 years ago, we couldn't be talking about the city not growing, but now we have, seminars on, shrinking the city. And I think that these are opportunities that are being offered by the follies of our past. So when the heat wave comes again, we have a way to take our cudgels against the business as usual, growth as usual narrative. So I think new narratives have to be set up. New possibilities have to be looked at. What those possibilities are, we don't know. So people usually ask you, what is the alternative to this? Now, might not be one alternative. I don't have all the answers, please. But the issue is that neither do you. I mean, just because, I don't have the answers doesn't mean that what you're doing is an answer. It is not. So that needs to be challenged. Also, the thing is that let us try and understand what are the problems that we are dealing with. Because with this whole heat thing, the issue is not to give buttermilk. The issue is people working under those horrendous conditions. They mustn't be working under those horrendous conditions. What are you doing as an economy, as a government, as a society, as a culture, as people, as activists to address that? Because if the issue is going to be giving buttermilk, that is the most obscene kind of an intervention that one can get into. If you're finding people living in poor quality housing as a result of that, they're facing heat stress, then the issue is quality housing. So these are things that need to be not better hospital facilities, not more oxygen in your COVID wards. So let's get some of the fundamentals right. I think that these things might not be implementable immediately. But unless they are on the radar as the solutions, as the things that need to be done, which means in an unequal society, you're likely to have crisis after crisis. Somebody's always living in a state of crisis. So if your interventions do not have an element of equalizing society in the multiple intersectionalities, I'm talking about gender, caste, class, etc., then you are wasting your time.
Thank you so much, sir. If anyone else has a question, you can raise a hand. We'll just give it a couple of seconds, sir, and then we'll proceed. All right. I don't think we have any more open questions. Did anybody unmute?
Antariksha.
Yeah. Antariksha ji, do you want to go ahead? All right. So we thank you so much for being here with us today, and we really thank you that you were able to guide us on such a crucial issue. And we really look forward to having you in the future in pre-events as well. It was an enlightening session, and we look forward to learning from you in the future as well. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Priyanka ji and Bhargavi and Professor Patel. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. With that, we will be moving on to our second session for the day, and I'm honored to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI. Ma'am will be guiding us on the topic of women in environment action. Thank you for being with us here today, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you, IMPRI team, for this opportunity, and welcome, Ms. Bhargavi Rao. It was nice to listening to you, part of your lecture, and also Mr. Jagannath's points which he raised about the city of Mumbai and the priorities that we have in the name of for disaster management. My topic is gender and environmental concerns, environmental actions that have taken place in India and other countries at the initiative of feminist movement. So is my PPT visible? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
So this, yeah. So we all know that, yeah.
Full screen.
So when it comes to environmental action, women's was in 72 when women from Chipko movement, they how do I, okay. So we had a Chipko movement in the 70s where women from Himalayan valleys, they became a guardian and the promoter of life-centered cultures, and they approached the kind of destruction that was happening and the 7 types of calamities which they had to face, mainly because of the arbitrary felling of tree. There used to be tremendous water shortage, rainfall had stopped, had reduced farming, which women were in charge of. That was facing crisis. Women who had to collect fuel, fodder, and water, that has also become extremely scarce. Because of the scarcity of livelihood resources, so many women were committing suicide after a whole day of running around from one hill to other and not getting one pitcher of water. They would just jump from the hilltop and kill themselves. And also the local man who were taken by the contractors were employed by the contractors as a daily wage earner for felling the tree. They were also, whatever wages they were getting was going only on alcohol. The same contractors were also running the whole business of alcohol distribution. And that's whatever money that was generated, that never reached home. And women in this desperate situation approached Sundarlal Bahuguna, Gandhian leader, and the whole Chipko movement came into existence. it became a symbol of women's collective resistance throughout the world. We also now have NAPM, National Alliance of People's Movement, which had also taken up a very important issues and the campaigns regarding mega development projects, which cause environmental disaster, displacement of people, and destruction of the habitat. The whole concept of habitat, you can't treat communities as piece of furniture. They can't be just shoved from one place to other. So the whole question of respect for habitat, lifestyle, their symbiotic relationship with the Mother Earth, all has to be respected. That was the message women's movement gave. Ecofeminism as a movement, I think that became very powerful during mid-70s, and it's not only in India, but in several parts of the world, we saw ecofeminist concerns, and the thinking got traction. And we see the ecofeminism sees a connection between exploitation and degradation of natural resources and subordination and oppression of women. It emerged in the mid-70s alongside second wave of feminism and also the green movement in different parts of the world. Ecofeminism brings together elements of feminist and green movements while at the same time offering challenge to both. It takes from green movement a concern about impact of human activities on non-human world, that means animal kingdom, plant kingdom, and the ecosystem of the Mother Earth. And from feminism, the view of humanity as gendered ways that subordinate, exploit, and oppress women. So what we see that as activists in the women's movement and also women's studies researches and the academic movement also, the issue of critical connections between denomination of nature and also exploitation of women, that became very important. So dominating Mother Nature, exploiting Mother Nature, thinking that we are conquering the nature, that itself is a wrong way of looking at the world and the environment. So ecofeminist activism grew during 1880s and 1980s and 1990s among women, from anti-nuclear movement, environmental movement, lesbian feminist movements, and then the ecofeminist agenda also was discussed in the conference in Amherst in 1980, where the first series of ecofeminist conferences, which were and that also coincided with the International Women's Decade, where equality, development, and peace were very important concerns. And development, there was a redefinition and relook at the conventional understanding of development, which only saw as industrialization or modernization or agricultural mechanization as development. As against that, the concern was about human development, gender and development, and also the indicators of development were education, health, security, food sovereignty, and also FA also came for Food and Agricultural Organization of UN also said that the future of food sovereignty lies in the hands of women, because women are there in the subsistence production, which is very important for the life, not only of human beings, but also of plant and animal kingdoms. So now what we see, and I think my previous speakers also showed, that we are in a state of emergency and we must do something about it. And around the world, like economies, cultures, natural resources, they are plundered, and only so 20% of world's population, which is the privileged North Americans and Europeans, they can continue to consume 80% of the resources of Mother Earth in the name of progress. So we need the whole questioning about what entails progress, that has also started happening for the first time after Second World War. Now, Maria Mies and Vanna Shiva have made a very important contribution, because it is not just a romantic version of ecofeminism, but it is rooted in the material reality and how the capitalist patriarchal perspective interprets difference as hierarchical and uniformity as a prerequisite for equality. So I think this is a very, very important thing which we need to. The difference is we all can be different, but still we can be equal. We can have a mutually respectful relationship. But the capitalist thinking, which is also like not circular, but it is like a pyramid. So everyone, the difference is which is the superior culture, which is the inferior culture, why ethnic minorities are treated to be not part of the civilized world. What do we mean by civilization? So that kind of questioning started happening. So what Maria Mies and Vandana Shiva say, that our aim is to go beyond the narrow perspective of what is difference, and we don't see difference as a hierarchical organization. But plurality is very important. Express our diversity in different ways, address inherent inequalities in the world structures which permit the North to dominate the South, man to dominate women, and frantic plunder of ever more resources. That means it's a predatory capitalism because it is extractivist. It is not generating resources. It is not nurturing the existing living beings, but it is only is a very predatory in its nature, and it is also very exploitative when it comes to economic and natural resources, and also peoples in different geographical locations. So ecofeminists state that everywhere women were the first to protest against environmental destruction. We saw how women fisher folks in Fiji Islands fought against nuclear testing way back in the late 80s. How women from Japan in Minamata, where the Minamata company was releasing mercury mercury poisoning the sea, and which resulted in a massive harm, like the fish and the human beings, all of them suffered. The carcinoma increased. Jellyfish babies were this thing. So pregnant women were also suffering a lot. Jellyfish babies, the babies without limbs and legs, they were they were born, and big campaign emerged, and that was the time the culture of making documentaries on this guy's developmental issues was also very strong, and when feminist movement saw to it that these films were shown, and finally the public opinion, the world opinion was also built, and Minamata company was punished. Similarly, we saw when Bhopal gas tragedy took place in 1984, it was the health organizations, human rights organizations, environmental organizations, they took up the issue, but persistently fighting against the issue till the date, till now, is done by the women who were affected by the Bhopal gas tragedy. They delivered stillborn babies. Now also there is a myth that girls from no one should marry a girl from Bhopal. Why? Because the impact of methyl isocyanide, which was released at the time of the Union Carbide disaster, has impacted women's reproductive health. So I think as activists in the ecology movements, it became clear to all of us that science and technology were not gender neutral. And in common with many other women, we began to see that relationship of exploitative dominance between man and nature, shaped by reductionist modern science since the 16th century, and the exploitative and oppressive relationship between man and women, and prevails in most patriarchal societies. And I think this whole plundering of Mother Nature or dominating Mother Nature and dominating women, they go hand in hand. That is the ecofeminist way of putting the issues of how patriarchal, capitalist patriarchy is playing havoc with the life of civilization, and we need to fight against it. So the mission of ecofeminists was to redefine how societies look at productivity, because we are all obsessed about productivity. If you read everyday newspapers, every time now the budget is being discussed, only obsession, what industry is demanding, what Fortune 500 companies are demanding, are only productivity linked bonus and no corporate tax. Okay, these are the only two concerns they have about the budget. So this is the way the capitalist patriarchy looks at the world development. But activity of both man and both women and nature, who have mistakenly been deemed passive, because that's what we say, that the women and mother earth, they are passive, while the man, they are the man of action. So allowing for them both to be ill-used. So you ill-use mother earth, you ill-use the nature's bounty, and you also dominate women, you also perpetuate varied forms of gender-based violence. So I think there are a lot of parallels between these two processes. So a stream in a forest, like our society, it's perceived as unproductive. If it is simply there, okay, fulfilling the needs of water for women's families and communities, until engineers come along and tinker with it and perhaps damming it and using it for generating hydropower. So how we look at the natural resources, the water, which is for consumption of people, which is and provision of your drinking water, is a women's domain, and that you consider as a just unproductive. But when it is used for generating hydropower, it becomes productive. Okay, economists also see things like that. So monetization and commercialization, I think the same thing happens when it comes to forest resources. Forest is perceived as useless. It is planted with the monoculture plantation of commercial species. We have seen the whole history of bamboo production after the colonization of our country. So many plant varieties, they were destroyed because bamboo was required for paper industry, and that was the time printing industry was getting popularity. And how the people, those who protested against it, they were declared as criminal tribes, they were incarcerated, and they were completely robbed of their forest resources. And they, for generations, for thousands of years, they had lived in harmony with Mother Nature. That was completely destroyed. A forest may well be productive, protecting groundwater, creating oxygen, allowing villagers to harvest fruits, fuel, craft material, honey, so many types of herbs, which medicinal herbs, and they're creating a habitat for animals that are also valuable resource. However, for many, it is not for export or contribution to GDP without money value to it. So it cannot be seen as a productive resource. That is what the mainstream economics or the people who have a commercial interest in, they see everything in terms of monetized. And that's what anything which is not monetized is not considered to be productive. So this way of thinking also we need to question. Now, what are the learnings of 4 extremely important movements by the collective led by women's collectives? One was, as I told you, Stipko, which inspired so many other movements. In the 80s, we had an Apiko movement in Karnataka. There too, women played they hugged the tree. We also had a movement led by Janu, a tribal leader, woman leader, who fought against the multinationals like Nestle and Cadbury's, they are the price makers, and the coffee growers were not getting anything. She fought for the land rights of the tribal community in Kerala, in Wayanad, and also against the whole crashing of the agricultural product prices at the time of harvesting. Why only at that time prices would crash? What is the game plan? She exposed that, and she had a long march from Wayanad to Thiruvananthapuram. We had a person like Ila Bhatt and Self-Employed Women's Association. They waged a war against destruction of a mountain, Girnar. So Save Girnar campaign was also inspired by by Chipko and Apiko and the struggle of Janu. And currently what is happening in city of Mumbai is a Save RA. The citizens of Mumbai, every Sunday, they have a dharna, they have a sit-in And they also talk about that, they also hug the tree, and they are not, they are fighting against the government, which wants the only green patch we have in a city of Mumbai, that will also go away if we have a whole yard for the metro. So more than 15,000 trees are expected to be felled if that project comes up, but people are still fighting against it. So when it comes to subsistence farming, we can see that the global experience of growth and poverty reduction shows that GDP growth originating in agriculture is at least twice as effective in reducing poverty as GDP growth originating outside agriculture. Currently, we are all obsessed about urbanization. We boast about this thing that more than 60% of India's population will become urban. But what will happen to food sovereignty? What will happen to food and nutrition security of the population? I think that's a very important question which the community is asking. World Hunger Report, if you see the situation of hunger in Africa, in Latin American countries, and in Asian countries, especially in India. India also has a major question of hunger, and the whole PDS, dismantling of PDS. I was just 2 days back in a tribal area of Thane district. The children of 8th, 9th, and 10th standard, they look like 2nd, 3rd, and 4th standard students. They're so small in body mass index. When the CSR organization approached them, that they would get them shoes and they would get them uniform and books and school bag, the first thing the teachers and students asked was that, can you start community kitchen? We are the hunger is a major problem in most of the, even places which are 70 or 80 kilometers away from city of Mumbai. So you can see, so UNICEF reports have also shown the extent of hunger that we have in the interior parts of most of the developing countries. So when women, land holding is a small land holding. Only 8% of women are there as a landholders. Okay, I'm not talking of land use. Land use, you have a highest number of women who are doing farm work. But when it comes to ownership rights, only 8% of women have a land ownership right, and that too of between half an acre to 2 acres. Okay, so they are the marginal farmers and small holding. But these small holdings play a very important role in raising agricultural development and poverty reduction. This is what Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research Director, Shri Mahendra Dev has to say. Why? Because they are the ones who are providing subsistence crop, not the commercial crop. Commercial crop, like for the agro business, is the consumers for that are city people. But what keeps the population alive is the subsistence crop. And that's what this Mahila Samakhya project of Uttar Pradesh, where all women have a very pivotal role in subsistence production. They say that I want to leave, branches and leaves are my adornments. Okay, they are my ornaments because agriculture is so important to us. Now, the common principles accepted by the women's movement and the action groups, whether they are community-based organizations or NGOs or civil society organizations or environmental organizations, they all believe in principles of earth democracy. So as against the corporate greed and the extractivist capitalism, the alternative posed by the people's movement is principles of earth democracy. What does it mean? Which are the features of this earth democracy? That all species, peoples, cultures have intrinsic worth. You just can't say that certain people have a right to live. Because that whole social Darwinist thinking, which colonial masters used, about the superior civilizations and the people who are barbaric, and they can be treated, they can be enslaved, they can be bonded, they can be killed. That kind of mentality and that kind of psyche we need to fight. Earth community is a democracy of all lives, or plurality, pluralism of lifestyle, plurality in animal kingdom, plural this thing of flora and fauna, they are extremely important. Diversity in nature and culture must be defended. You just can't be monoculture. You can't just say that only like we all are criticizing now Green Revolution, which focused only on rice and wheat. Okay, so that gave us carbohydrate. But then what about the micronutrient? So now we don't talk only about food security. We are talking about food and nutrition security. So diversity in nature and diversity in culture. So we just can't impose what the colonial masters did. The homogenization of culture we need to fight against. All beings have a natural right to sustenance. Earth democracy is based on living economies and economic democracy. That means some people cannot control all the resources. You can't commercialize lakes and rivers. You can't commercialize mountains. You can't treat the natural resources as a private property. It is a public good. Living economies are built on local economies, so it's very important to strengthen local economies. I think pandemic has taught us why it is so important to strengthen the local economies. When you talk about the supply chain, when this disaster also showed that when supply chain breaks, what happens? Earth democracy is living democracy, and earth democracy is based on living cultures. Okay, so it is you need to all of them have they need oxygen. They need a positive enabling environment to lead their cultural life. Living cultures are life nourishing. Earth democracy globalizes peace, because currently what is globalization? Globalization is just colonization, extracting the natural resources, mineral resources, using child labor, slave labor, modern forms of slavery. As against that, Earth democracy globalizes peace, care, and compassion. Now, all species, peoples, and cultures have intrinsic worth. Everyone is, you can't treat them as worthless. Anybody can be treated as worthless. Earth community is a democracy of all life, and diversity in nature and culture must be defended. And that's why you can see in these posters also that we are growing with the green. All of us are why the green economy becomes very important. And protect and celebrate life. That is also the woman farmer is saying the same symbol of Chipko movement. They are also saying that we need to protect. Now, Vandana Shiva, one of the spokespersons and very articulate and vociferous spokesperson of Earth Democracy, she has also given a very strong opinion on the genetically modified crops. That means focus on promotion of genetically modified crops in the developing country, and also total absence of recommendations relating to promotion of sustainable ecological agriculture will, on the one hand, deprive poor of ecological and decentralized production systems. So the plant variety, we know that Madhya Pradesh alone, Chhattisgarh alone has a 200 varieties of rice. Now the rice scientist, Dr. Richarya, he started a rice bank, and so that these plant varieties don't die away. We don't need only basmati and column. Each region has its own variety, and these varieties are extremely important. Women's groups have also started doing that in Karnataka. They have come up with seed banks. Okay, so women are running seed banks. They are using traditional methods of protecting these seeds. They are very different from the corporates who are giving seeds at a exorbitantly high price, and they take away the intellectual property. Here, these women, they tell the farmers to donate seeds for the community. They are kept preserved in the higher area which would not be destroyed by the heavy rains or floods. And whenever farmers need seeds, they are giving them free of charge. And again, like the pull has to go on. So this is the way whole community survives. There is everyone has a stake. Everyone takes responsibility for seeing to it that the diversity doesn't disappear. On the other hand, like if we see the major risk of creating nutritional apartheid that is happening, that who gets to eat genetically engineered food? Okay, it is the poor people, because you're the mass production and you distribute it on a big way without even knowing what are the implications, what are the side effects, what has the research shown. While the people who have money, though they can eat the organic food or they can eat this thing. So I think we need to see this food apartheid, which is being created by genetically engineered free foods, which is given to the poor in most of the European countries. When I was in Germany, I was told that small children were developing beard or pubic hair. Even woman would, girl child would this because they were given genetically engineered food in the working class locality. So scientists and so many times this kind of science researches are also suppressed. The corporates won't provide fund because you need funds for research. So the feminists created their own organization, international scientists and the doctors and academicians and researchers. They came up with the FINREG, Feminist International Network, on reproductive health and against genetic engineering. And they started sharing information. They started sharing findings of the research so that whatever harmful effects were there can be curtailed. So when Vandana Shiva got Right Livelihood Award, in her acceptance speech, she said, and I quote, that I am increasingly sensing that primary threat to nature and people today comes from centralizing and monopolizing power and control, which inevitably generates one-dimensional structures and what I have called, quote unquote, monoculture of the mind. The monoculture of the mind treats all diversity as a disease, creates coercive structure to model this biologically and culturally diverse world of ours on the privileged categories and concepts of one class, one race, one gender of a single species. These simultaneous colonizations are inevitable result, the colonizations of nature's diverse species, colonization of women, colonization of third world. So the politics of diversity is for me the ground for resisting all three colonizations. Conservation of diversity is above all. The commitment to let alternatives flourish in society and nature, in economic systems and in knowledge systems, cultivating and conserving diversity is no luxury in our times. It is a survival imperative and the precondition for freedom of all, the big and the small. And I think Maria Mises' book, I recommend all of you to read that book, Women as a Last Colony, where she says that 200 years of colonization that this world experienced in Africa, Latin America, and Asia in the 19th and 20th century, first half of 20th century. Now that kind of colonization is not possible. So how does the world capitalism thrive to maintain its super profit, to maintain its and expand its domain? What they do, they are using young girls and women as a last colony, using all patriarchal stereotypes and the gender norms. They induct them into the production processes, don't allow them to have any collective voice, and exploit them and give them the lowest wages. Vandana Shiva's gender analysis, where she has critiqued globalization, and where she says that the globalization manifests itself primarily as a removal of national barriers to trade and investment. The gender analysis needs to move beyond an exclusively domestic model of analysis. So there is a need to understand that whatever is happening at a global level, it has its dire implications at a local level. So the slogan of feminist movement, that think globally, act locally. But now there is a modification. Think and act globally as well as locally. We need to keep our eyes and ears open, and also the transnational solidarity becomes very important in current context. So it is very gender analysis. How is it, any processes, any development, any mega project, is it creating enabling environment or disabling environment for the community, for the women, for the elderly? It's very important. And what are the institutions and structures? What kind of communities? What kind of caste they are supporting? And what happens to the people who are facing intersectional marginalities and vulnerabilities, multiple vulnerabilities based on caste, class, race, religion, ethnicity, and geographical location becomes very important. So I think there's women's concerns and priorities and perceptions. They are excluded from the global discourse, and we need to bring it center stage. And that's why when even the climate change discourse started, there was in the first document which the UNFPA came out, UN came out with, did not even have a word called women. It was only after the collective resistance by the women's groups all over the world that document called Gender and Climate Change came into existence. And so many researches at area studies, researches had shown that how the globalization is a project of capitalist patriarchy robs women of their productivity and creativity by destroying nature and also sustenance economy, and devaluing women's knowledge, because women's work is mostly non-marketed. Major work that women do, women of the world do in the rural, tribal, and forest areas is a collection of fuel, fodder, water, animal care, and kitchen gardening, a collection of non-timber forest products, at least in our country and TFP. They are very, very important, and we need to put forward the arguments. And so what are the cultural implications of women losing their right over their resources or the subsistence production is very important. And that is why so many good examples, we have some of the best practices that have come is the Deccan Development Authority women's clusters in the drought prone area. They have come up with the seed savers. They are freely distributing seeds to the farmers. We have a multi-crop methods which women in Bundelkhand have used. We have seen that women are asking questions to the local authorities. We also, when the Jala Swarajya, the sovereignty over water, that campaign was started in Maharashtra, it was women who played proactive role. And the whole political economy of water that was also faced a major challenge because the water was centralized and concentrated by the local vested interest, and it was used for commercial purpose. So the question of localization and is very important, and strengthening the communities is very, very important. And that is what the ecofeminist movement has also been saying. I don't fully agree with ecofeminism, but their vision of examining the political economy is extremely important, and we need to reject women nature, the dichotomy between women and nature. It is not. There is a harmony between women and nature. We need to reinforce women-nature connection. And third direction is recognition that although nature-culture dualism is a product of culture, we can nonetheless consciously choose not to sever the women-nature connection by joining male culture. But we need to foster this whole question of the process of harmony with nature. 11 types of environmentalism that have flourished in different parts of the world. One that is whether it is regarding wildlife management or conservation of water, conservation of nature, preservation of seed varieties, reform environmentalism, which is totally focusing only on technology as against the people. Deep ecology is very important. Environmental justice. Who gains for any project? That, as Dr. Medha Patkarji also asked, that who shoulders the burden of any mega development project? Who pays the price and who benefits? So that cost-benefit analysis becomes very important. What are the health implications of environmental imbalance? Then eco-spiritualism, eco-feminism, question of animal rights movement has also raised pertinent questions. Even during the pandemic, what was happening to the animals around us? That so many young people, they intervened, they started nurturing animals, and the whole way of looking at non-human living beings also changed. There are so many, like in Kerala, you saw that there was an anti-globalization movement where the Kutumbashri, they said that whatever is locally, just support local production, whether it's agrarian production, handicraft, and also buy local, strengthen the local community strengthen the green economy. That is very important. Similarly, even in several African countries, women's groups, person like Wangari Maathai, who started Green Belt movement, who questioned the agribusiness, and they said that the hunger in Africa is not created by Africans, okay? It is created by the agribusiness, which forced in collusion with the dictators in Africa, they forced the farmers at gunpoint to change the cropping pattern. The corn, which is a basic staple food, which is a complete food for African community, that was for the commercial crop was imposed, where the cocoa and coffee and strawberry and pineapple they were forced to grow, so, and they were taken away at a throwaway price by the agribusiness for the soft drink industry, and also for the juice which the northern countries they consume. So ecofeminist imperative brings women's concerns, women's interest center stage, and also the concern of those who have been exploited, those who have been at the receiving end. They also fight against the ideologies which are based on oppression, injustice, exploitation, and intimidation, such as racism or casteism or gender-based violence. So it is a holistic perspective, holistic worldview, which defends the rights of children, women, working class people, elderly, people with disability, and the sexual minorities, LGBTQIA community. The environmental vulnerability has increased manifold in the current times. Women's organizations and a cluster of women all over the world, in the rural areas, in the forest areas, are now fighting, and they are asking questions: what is this development? Where is my livelihood? Where is the well-being of my children? What future do we have in current system, exploitative system, where you are commercial plantation is imposed into in the forest dwellers, big dams for power generation are destroying villages after villages, indiscriminate mining with the use of slave labor and children, massive use of children in the mining industry that is taking place. Deforestation is playing ecological havoc in the areas where the landslides have become villages after villages get buried, and the environmental balance is disturbed. Animal protection and human rejection, that is a major this thing. Even this year's award-winning films also went to the issue of this theme. The question of air pollution, about which my previous speaker, Madam Rao, spoke about, and also where globally, also according to International Labour Organization, 94% of the poor workers are in the informal sector. What security do they have? You don't have any social security, social protection, none of the concepts or covenants of decent work have been implemented. And that is why connecting the local issues with the global and the macroeconomic model, how to humanize macroeconomy, how to reach out, how to give new vision and reach out to all international bodies, whether they are General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, General Agreement on Trade and Service, the whole intellectual property regime, and also the whole vaccine politics, as we experienced during the pandemic. That first time we heard that such a profiteering that took place in the name of vaccine. And we know as children, we were getting smallpox vaccine free of charge. While in so many countries, African countries, people were dying. They were dying in millions, but still none of the rich multinational companies gave them vaccines. So I think this whole greed for profit, we need to fight against, and we need to bring collective wisdom of the women's movement over last 40, 50 years, from 1972 to 2024, center stage in our thinking. These are some of the important documents which I have referred to. All of them are in public domain. You can easily download them. They are by Food and Agricultural Organization. You have a Greta Gard's ecofeminism, which is very important, where she connects not only the welfare of human being, but women, animals, nature. That's very important. Karen Warren's work on ecofeminism, Maria Mies and Vandana Shiva's work on ecofeminism, then people-centered climate change adaptation, integrating gender issues by FAO, and Wangari Maathai's work, extremely important work, challenge for Africa. That she wrote based on her experiences of how agriculture and the food security and food sovereignty of Africa was compromised by the agribusiness. And Vandana Shiva's work, Staying Alive, which was inspired, this book was inspired by her visit to women in Himalayan valleys. The Chipko movement had played a deep impression, and she started seeing, as a scientist, she started connecting various segments, whether the environmental destruction, the path of development, mega projects, urbanization, the relationship between urban and rural, and women, and the ecology and development. I think these are very important references. Thank you for giving me opportunity.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a really comprehensive and enlightening session. I'd now like to invite Bhargavi ma'am for her remarks in the session. And in the meanwhile, participants, please put your questions in the Q&A box or the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we'll get back to them after ma'am's remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, and thank you so much, first of all, for giving me this opportunity to chair this particular session, because it's such a privilege to be on the panel with Professor Vibhuti Patel and of course Niti, who spoke earlier. And thank you so much, Professor, because I think you started with the Chipko movement, and that is such an important milestone in the entire environmental movement, not just in India but across the globe, and how women led the entire movement. And it all started because their everyday livelihood was such a nightmare, and how they mobilized and got together and fought the entire battle. And thank you for walking us through the entire chronological events of the feminist movement, starting in the mid 70s, and then all the way till recent times. And how at the time of when Maria Mies and Vandana Shiva were working, how a little before that was this whole state of emergency. I think that state of emergency has just kind of amplified and magnified even now, and that I think was a very important milestone that you spoke about. And also the many questions that were raised by these two stalwarts of the feminist movements in environmental action. Thanks for raising the important environmental disaster of the Minamata disease. And Minamata disease, as most of us on this panel know, that it is caused by mercury poisoning. Many years ago, we were working in coastal Karnataka. It reminds me of a field trip. And somebody was telling us that there is some construction happening in coastal, the Karwar area. And they said construction workers are very lazy, and that's the reason local people have not been employed, but labor has been brought from outside. When we were talking a little bit more, and we understood that there was a caustic soda factory close by which had been dumping all its waste all around. And the waste, given that the Western Ghats and that entire coastal belt receives so much of rainfall, all of that caustic soda waste material must have got flooded into the fields and water systems and everywhere. And we were just wondering, of course there was no studies or anything done at that time, but the fact that they said you can't hire labor from here because everybody suffers from laziness. They didn't say they suffer from laziness, they just said they're all very lazy. How can you just call an entire community lazy, was a question that troubled us. And we thought maybe some studies here was needed, because it could be related to mercury poisoning. So similarly, Minamata disease that happened first brought in a whole lot of awareness across the world about mercury poisoning. And thanks for walking us through this entire history and overview of this entire movement and the many things that came about it. Again, you spoke about bamboo and the industry and how it has erased the bamboo forests of the country. The paper and pulp industry is one of the most dirty industry anywhere. And what we need to also understand is all this, the dirty industries have been moved to countries like ours. The West has literally cleaned up all its dirty industries, and we have taken up all these paper pulp, caustic soda, these kind of industries, which are water intensive, energy intensive, and they also cause a lot of pollution, and pollution of the local rivers, where pollution goes unchecked. And most of these units always do not have effluent treatment plants, and even if they have effluent treatment plants, they will not be fully functional. It is not a tertiary level ETP. A series of problems related to that, and you can imagine the downstream effects of living in these areas, because drinking that water, growing crops in that area. So thanks for enlightening that, starting from how such industries have just erased all our bamboo forests. And you also spoke about all the other movements like the Apiko and the movement in Wayanad by C.K. Janu, Ila Bhatt, and what is happening now, the Save RA. And actually every city you see, I think women are in the forefront to protect, whether it is trees or saying no to a flyover or a steel corridor or whatever. You see a lot more women today, and they continue to play a very significant role in environmental movements and actions. And you raise the issue of children undernourished, and teachers asking for community kitchens. This is a serious problem. And given that communities are being displaced and land is being diverted, so there is no food at the household level at the end of the day. So that's the reason that children are stunted. So thanks for highlighting that. And also this entire principles of earth democracy and walking us through the entire thing, drawing attention to GM crops, what is happening. GM crops is all about seed sovereignty, how our farmers and particularly women have protected these seeds through the seed banks that you mentioned. I think is something that our participants would love to read and understand more. And how these seed banks play such a critical role in agriculture of the small and marginal farmers, because they don't have the money to buy the fancy seeds and the packages that come along with it. And we all know what Sainath had exposed in his reports many years ago about how farmer suicides are happening along the BT cotton areas. And thank you for drawing attention to the monoculture of the mind. Yes. And about thinking and acting locally and globally. Locally today has become more important. So how we need to address local problems, and particularly with attention to the impacts on women, and how significant it is to reconnect women and nature. With all the technology that is coming in, sometimes I find that in rural areas, women seem to stay at the back. It is the men who are handling all the cell phones or dealing with all the technology when it comes to farmers adapting some auctions and things like that. And the fact that women are not even recognized as farmers, it's such a small percentage of women who have their names on the documents of the family farming, land documents. These are areas that really need a lot of attention, a lot more talking. And thank you for highlighting all the big names like Wangari Maathai, whose stories will never fail to inspire. You can read them any number of times. And lastly, the last slide particularly was very eye-catching, and I'm sure it'll stay in the minds of all our participants, because it spoke about all the problems from dams to mining to plantation, deforestation, pollution from factories, and how the woman and the child are at the center of it all and how they are bearing the brunt of it all. I think it was a very inspiring talk, and our participants definitely learned a lot from this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bhargavi. It means a lot to me, because mine is only collective wisdom of women's movement, the scientific knowledge you have. So,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We have a question from Deepanita Mishra ji. Deepanita ji, please go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Professor Vibhuti, for this wonderful presentation. My question, so I have been working specifically in the gender and NRM space for a couple of years now. And my question stems from having spoken to practitioners and academicians. So it's particularly regarding the gap between academia and development as we understand it in academia and in, well, how practitioners see it. Because like we've been discussing in this session also, climate change, funding for climate change, climate finance, all of these aspects do not cover traditional knowledge or say women's participation in the truest sense, or even respecting their role. So, I mean, the funding definitely never caters to that. Whereas on the other side, other hand, we have certain, research-based projects which are trying to cover that gap through particular evidence and research focusing on specific communities, their livelihoods, their lifestyle, and how that is catering to climate change adaptation in a very sort of, as we are saying, local way. But there is a huge gap between the two because large-scale projects do not seem to have adequate funding for taking up that perspective where women's knowledge or women's even presence is required or deemed necessary or respected. So from a policy level or from a standpoint of actually initiating change when climate change is concerned, I just wanted to know what was your view on this gap between.
That is why I think the change in the slogan, think and act globally as well as locally, because otherwise what happens, you be busy with your micro. And that's what I think Chetna Gala Sinha also says, that whenever anything is a tiny micro and localized, you ask women to do. That means your voice will never be heard. So it is very important that whether it is global discourses or regional discourses, everywhere we have to take this perspective. I admire the initiative which Professor Veena Majumdar had during 80s, and when it came to Joint Forest Management Mission of Government of India, where she would make all these technocrats and the bureaucrats and the planning commission members and engineers as a participant. And the women from tribal areas or women forest manager, women in the forest, they would be the resource person, no? So I think that kind of a reverse this thing, no, hierarchy. Reversing the hierarchy is very, very important. And giving them mic, first of all, representation. Most important fight that we need to have is women's representation in all environmental and climate change discourses. Not only representation, but voice. Mic has to be in their hand. And I think that has to be done very, very systematically. And wherever it is possible, like first of all, even in institutions like IITs or IIMs or where academic institutions, which are now mostly become a commercial center because everything is so linked to funds. But I think there also we need to take this collective wisdom of women and the voice of women. That is, I think, more and more development oriented. This to write about it, to speak about it, to lobby about it, to come up with the creative expressions. No, talking to the artists, to the filmmakers. You saw 4 or 5 good films which have come up in last 4 or 5 years. She's by the young, that one on Tiger, no, that is written by a young 26-year-old young script writer who was earlier in the mainstream, and now she had a crossover. Only when they get this kind of exposure or dialogue with those who have been working at a ground level. So I think those dialogues have to be systematically organized, and that's how various ways of this thing, the kind of work which Ladli Media Award or Population First is doing. They organize the workshop of the journalists and media people on all these issues, and then they write about it. Even the award which they have instituted in several languages, 10, 12 languages, that has also created a new kind of journalism, which is socially responsible, which cares for the people, which is grounded in the local reality, and which also brings the voices of those who have been unheard so far. So I think all of us, wherever we are, in whichever position of power, or whether you are in NGO or GO or academic institutions or corporate, I think this voice, we have to create more and more democratic spaces and platforms where such discourses take place, and wherever it is possible. Like I said, 2 days back, 5 feminists, 5 of us, we went to those areas in the deep forest of Maharashtra. And whatever we saw, we interacted, we spent a lot of time with the students and teachers. And after coming back, we wrote about it, we spoke about it, and we are sensitizing the bureaucrat, because we all are there in the training programs of various ministries and departments, and at a subnational level and national level. There also we have to take this, and wherever possible, bring them on the platform and let them speak. Otherwise, we can also convey if we don't have resources. But it's very important to keep the issues alive, no? Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Do we have any other question? We'll just give it a couple of seconds. If anybody has a question, you can raise a hand. All right. I think we do not have any more open questions. Ma'am, I would like to thank you so much for being here today and taking out your time for us. And it's always a great learning opportunity whenever we get to hear from you. So thank you so much. And we will be seeing you in further events. So lovely learning from you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we now move on to our final session for the day. And for the final session, I would like to invite our chair, Ms. Bhargavi S. Raoji, independent researcher and educator, environmental activist, Bengaluru, and visiting senior fellow at IMPRI. Ma'am will be speaking on the topic environment, social inclusion, communities, and natural resources. The floor is all yours, ma'am. Please take it from here.
Thank you. Just give me a minute. Thank you so much. So I was actually thinking I should start this session by asking all of you to just type in a single word. What was it, that one thing that made you enroll for this course? And that would be very interesting to see, given that, we've come almost toward the end of this course. It'll be very interesting. What was it, that one word that you can think of that made you enroll for this course? And now, after so many sessions, it'll be also good to understand where you are, and you really think that word that made you enroll for this course was fulfilled. It would be good to see it in the chat box. You all can take time and put it in there as we go through the day. We will go through the evening. We will go back to the chat box in the interest of time. And the next thing I also wanted to start was with this picture and the words from Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, where she says, we stand now where two roads diverge, but unlike the roads in Robert Frost's familiar poem, they are not equally fair. The road we have long been traveling is deceptively easy, a smooth superhighway on which we progress with great speed, but at its end lies disaster. The other fork of the road, the one less traveled by, offers our only chance to reach a destination that assures the preservation of this earth. So I think we are all at that point, and we have little choice but to take the other fork. And thanks for enrolling for this course, because that definitely shows that you've chosen the latter. So I thought, in the context of the topic that was assigned to me, I will walk you through the many projects that are happening and see where we are headed and what is happening. So like I said before, there is this huge land grab that is happening in the name of mega infrastructure projects. It is highways, it is airport expansion plans, and in the name of climate change, we already learned that how land is being taken for solar and wind parks. These are utility scale parks. So you can imagine the scale at which these parks are being built. India is home to second, third, and the fourth solar power park. Now the one we have in Karnataka is the third largest solar power park. I think that got overtaken by the one that has come up in Kutch now. And the other picture you see is about what is happening to our coastal communities. In the context of our coasts, there are hundreds of these port development plans and blue flag beaches that are coming up. And again, in the name of climate change, land is being diverted for a whole lot of tree planting projects. So in all of this, who pays the price and who's benefiting is the question. And obviously the ones who are losing are the small and marginal farmers. So if you read up all the documents concerned with any of these projects, it is the small and marginal farmers who land up giving the largest chunk of the land, and then you have a small percentage of big farmers who do give land, and they somehow manage to kind of reinvest and move on. And while such huge diversions are taking place, there is very little regard to the wildlife in and around those spaces. So today we have the largest number of plants and animals which are in the IUCN Red List. We've all been reading a lot about the Great Indian Bustard, and we are seeing stories of how elephants are finding it extremely difficult to move through their corridors. Elephants migrate throughout the year, right? They move from one area to the other, crisscrossing the Deccan Plateau here in the south and the northeastern ranges. So they need large spaces. They're huge animals. And when we build these roads or build dams or divert land for a variety of purposes, obviously their migratory routes are at stake. And these kind of projects which are done so mindlessly is definitely marking, a death knell for all these species. The picture of this little fish here, the fish is called Miss Kerala. This is a story of overexploitation, because at some point, some aquarium conference, somebody took this fish and exhibited there, and it became very popular. And they also assigned some feng shui properties to it, and they said, oh, if you keep it at home, you'll become very prosperous. So the rivers and streams of Kerala were mined out for this little fish, and soon it was on the IUCN Red List. In addition to this, sometime in 2012, when we were studying about the BT brinjal issue, we also found that about 190 plants were removed from the purview of the Biodiversity Act itself. And this was because they were considered as normally traded. And when you saw that list, you will see that, there are so many of the endangered and nearly threatened species in that list. And why would anybody want to not give protection to that under the Biodiversity Act, right? So there is mindless growth, like what Niti just said, and that growth is fueling this kind of extraction and destruction of our natural habitats. And if you also understand the patterns of land grab, it is very interesting, because we all know that the Land Acquisition Act got amended many times since 2010. It is an old act of 1894. And that was amended several times from 2010 to 2015, with civil society across the country pushing for fair and just amendments to ensure that farmers who are parting with the land get good compensation, fair compensation, and good rehabilitation and resettlement. But unfortunately, today, if you look at any project, nowhere is the LAR Act being implemented. Now we have newer methods of acquiring, taking control of land. This is lease, rent. Sometimes it is direct purchase by the project proponents, or sometimes it is using violence and threatening the local communities and snatching away the land from them. And also the new industrial policies are determining how Land Reforms Act are amended. So for example, the solar policy is largely favoring the diversion of lands. And there's been a whole lot of dilution of our environmental forest, biodiversity, and various other laws. And all these dilutions have only made it very easy for land diversions. And there's a failure of imagination also in our modern environmental laws, given that our environmental laws came only in 1985, 86 after the Bhopal gas tragedy. And since then, instead of strengthening the laws, our laws have only seen dilution. And this dilution is to favor all the human-centered interests of industrialization. And this is a image from the Land Conflict Watch website. You can just see the number of land conflicts that are happening. And here are people who are struggling to make a livelihood, and their very land on which they are dependent is being taken away. And for those people who protest, raise questions, it has been very harsh, the punishment. And then what is happening in these very villages where land is diverted is they have no other alternate skills. These are communities who've been practicing traditional occupations of farming, animal rearing, weaving, blacksmiths. There are so many of it. And today all those livelihoods have no use, because land is diverted. Once the land is diverted, farming stops. If farming stops, the blacksmith loses his job because nobody is coming to him asking him to make sickles. So these communities have to find a way out, right? So the youth and the able-bodied people leave the villages, and senior citizens and children and women stay back. And cities today are, witnessing challenges of how these people try and make a living out of, either in the construction industry or in the gig economy. And then they work under very harsh conditions. Again, there is no labor laws that protect them, no social security systems that protect them. And every other day they are struggling to make a living, and they're not really able to send anything back home as well. So in the context of the village, once the land is taken away, like I said before, the large landholders manage to reinvest that money. I can give you the example of Pavagada itself. In Pavagada, the land has gone for 21,000 rupees per acre per annum. And most of the farmers are 3 to 5 acre farmers. So what can they do with that 60,000 to 80,000 to 1 lakh a year kind of money? And that money comes into the man's bank account. And by the time that money comes into the hands of the women, it's a long route, and very little lands up as food at the household level. And because there is no food at the household level, they just make do with what they can eat. Even 1 small acre, they manage to grow enough grain to last them an entire year. So a basic paddy or a basic wheat, or just a little ragi here in the south, is enough for them to have some basic food needs. But today, with the land gone, they can't even graze their animals. As a result, senior citizens, children and women are left behind. Girl children are pulled out of school, child marriage has started, trafficking has started, and these children, they are not ready for a reproductive life. They themselves are their bodies are not equipped and they become mothers, and this will definitely give rise to the same challenges which we've been fighting over the last 50 years of infant mortality, maternal mortality, and all of that. And we don't even have studies to say what are these numbers of women who are suffering, what has happened since the last 2 decades, because the census has not been done more recently. There is an FAO study which shows that, how South Asia is, first of all, more prone to climate change, and how the number of women suffering from anemia and the children with low birth weight and stunted are increasing. And this is just a last year's study which highlights that. And this also speaks to what Professor Vibhuti Patel just shared with us, that how children don't have enough to eat. And, the teachers are asking for community kitchens. So you can imagine what is happening in most of the rural areas. But the lessons from the pandemic are very, very critical if at all we want to change the way we are doing things. And even having small pieces of land, of course, the horrendous sights of seeing all the laborers walk back home is something unforgivable. And some of them made it, some of them didn't make it. But those of them who did make it, they went back to their small little livelihoods on their small patches of land and somehow managed to survive. And these are livelihoods that are not connected to the grid. They don't emit any carbon, and they're not energy intensive or water intensive. And they've been sustaining this for years together. But these very livelihoods today are at stake. And the pandemic also taught us that having that land ownership is very important, because having that land helped them get some loan. Today, if you take away land, these farmers can't even go take a loan, get any other benefit from whatever programs and schemes exist. So this is something that we really need to keep in mind moving forward. And that reminds me of Professor Elinor Ostrom's quote. She got the Nobel Prize for Economics, and she had said, there is no reason to believe that bureaucrats and politicians, no matter how well-meaning, are better at solving problems than the people on the spot who have the strongest incentive to get the solution right. So in that context, so who owns our natural resources? Who uses, who decides, who benefits? We've learned a lot about these questions over the last couple of weeks. Definitely, it's the people who are the owners of the natural resources. The state is a custodian. But what has happened is the state has arrogated to itself the power of ownership. We learned from many of our speakers. I think Ranjan Panda was telling us that if you ask children, where does your water come from? They say the tap. So similarly, if you ask somebody to who does the river belong, they will say it belongs to the government. We have forgotten the fact that, rivers, forests, lakes, grazing pastures, seeds, all of this belongs to the people. The government is only a custodian of it. And movements and struggles across the country, across the world, have tried very hard to reclaim control of these natural resources and protect the commons. But yes, very few have managed to get some solutions to it. But then look at our constitutional promise. Article 39 of the Constitution says the state shall in particular direct its policy towards securing that the citizens, men and women, equally have the right to an adequate means of livelihood, that the ownership and control of the material resources of the community are so distributed as best to subserve the common good. And the last one, the operation of the economic system does not result in the concentration of the wealth and means of production to the common detriment. That, I think, is very important. And also all the principles invoked by the judiciary, which I did share briefly in the inaugural talk. All the various principles, but the principle of ecocentrism today is gaining momentum. along with the others. Our other speakers have highlighted a few of them, like the doctrine of public trust, the precautionary principle, principle of prior and informed consent, and all of that. So I won't go into it, but this ecocentrism is something that is gaining momentum, and people have been talking about Earth Law today. So the emerging stories and efforts of hope, Earth Law is something that everybody is talking about the world. Lawyers are working very hard to ensure nature has a voice in our courts. And we know from some examples across the world and in India how the Ganga and Yamuna got personhood from the Uttarakhand High Court. And similarly, there are other examples from other parts of the world. But that needs to sink in everywhere, that, you know, all these life forms have a similar stake, just as humans. If you look at the SDGs only talk about, you know, human beings. So look at SDG 1. Ending poverty. Do we ensure that the elephants have access to food? Do we ensure that the great Indian bustards have access to grasslands? Do we ensure other birds and bees have access to the food they need? No. So these are things that we need to rethink and reimagine. And also, many people have been talking about, many movements, communities, networks have been talking about reimagining nation-state boundaries with bioregional boundaries, which are governed by local communities. That, I think, is a lot of food for thought, because we have very little time, and that is the only way we could probably save ourselves and save the next generation and preserve all the natural resources we have. And also some of the good examples from across the world. We always seem to look at the West for examples, but then the Rojava example is again something I dearly love, where women have been central to all the revolution that is happening. They are into farming, they're into public health, they are into building the defense systems there, and they have ensured that in every decision, 50% women are involved. Whatever the decision be, 50% women should be on that panel, board, or whatever the forums are. That, I think, is a great example that we all need to, you know, make it our way of working as well. And also there are other examples, like in the Rwanda's constitution, where it sets a mandatory minimum quota for women. So I think these are examples to learn from and make them more popular, talk about it, ensure it reaches everybody, and people start thinking about it. The picture at the right bottom is the red sandalwood. You know, the Biodiversity Act in India was came about only in 2002, after India signed the 1992 CBD. But since then, the number of plants and animals that have reached the IUCN Red List is unimaginable. So where have we failed in implementing the Biodiversity Act? What are those things that have gone wrong? This again is being exploited left, right, center from all the remaining forests of the country. And along with it are a whole lot of other, you know, medicinal and herbal plants. So these are examples to kind of, you know, just help us rethink as to what is happening. And then, so moving forward, we've learned this again from all of our speakers. Decentralization and decision making is the way to go. Like I said, how the pandemic taught us, at the end of the day, it was your street that was ensuring you got your food, your medicine, or bed at the hospital, and the life-saving medicines and things like that. But the centralized ways of managing COVID was a utter failure, I could say. So decentralization is what we need, and the implementation of the 73rd and the 74th Amendment at all levels. And then the next thing is bridging the gap between science, law, policy, and decision making. Those of us who speak science, we are oblivious of what happens in social sciences, and those of us doing social science, we don't really understand the science of many things. I think it's very important to bring in marriages between all these areas, and that's when we can get a holistic view of things and we can take the right decisions. And in all our efforts, I think ensuring water, food, ecological, nutritional, and energy security is very important. While providing water, we seem to miss out on the others, or while looking at energy, we seem to miss out on the first few. So that is what is creating chain reaction of problems. And if you look at all the functions of the panchayat, which Dr. Tikender also had mentioned, I think all the functions are at the local level. The 11th and the 12th schedules have practically everything, and we need to make that functional. We need to help people imagine how all of those things can be fully functional at their local level. And people's participation, of course, and again, when we say people's participation, in our own circles, we need to be very conscious of who are the dominant voices, who are those voices we never hear about, and are we ensuring that we have representation from all castes, class, religions, gender, education, and more in whatever we are doing together. And local skill building is another very important thing, because I have seen a lot of examples from across the country, particularly in rural areas. Something that has been very disturbing to me is, adults and girls are trained on how not to agree to child marriage. They're given a lot of lectures and hand-holding on menstruation, personal hygiene, some soft skills, all of that. And then when it comes to skill building, it is beauty parlor course and tailoring, which reinforces gender. Instead, why not teach them other things? Carpentry, electrician, driving, even being a paramedic, nurse, midwife, so many things which can save lives, with which these young girls can live with dignity, and it's a lot more useful perhaps than the skills that are being taught everywhere. Then also in the context of this whole climate change and the transition that is happening, if you see the kind of skill building that is happening, it is very little, and all of it is happening in urban areas. There is nothing happening in the rural areas. So that's another area that really needs attention, and incorporating all the indigenous and traditional practices. That is a storehouse of knowledge, and that knowledge has come from years of experience. Today, in a tech-driven world, we seem to ignore and completely disregard it, and in many cases erase it from our books. So we really need to kind of hold on to that, because in many cases the little nuggets of information that there is the only thing that will help us move forward in the right direction. So with that, I would like to close with quote from Professor Sheila Jasanoff, who's a person who has been leading the socio-technical studies at Harvard Kennedy School. So she says, I'm kind of a sucker for democracy. So I do think that what kinds of citizens we have in our societies are more foundational than what kinds of governments we have, and that the responsibility for self-government is ultimately with us. But we have also learned through a couple thousand years of democracy that democracies are only as good as people's capacity to reflect on those questions. So with that, I will stop. There are lots of suggested and other readings. I will leave the presentation with Priyanka, and she will share it with all of you. So I'll be happy to take any questions if there are. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That is a very enlightening presentation and a very comprehensive one. In response to your question that is asked at the beginning of the session, we have a few responses in the chat box. I'll just read them out. Abhayar Menon says that action was the word that drove them towards this fellowship program. Then Maria Sajan says it's youth action. Tanisha Upadhyay says it's policy action. Deepanita says it's policies. Neeraj Bhatia ji says learning about national policies. And Ketan Pawar says it's about action. I think it's most of it is about action in general.
Thank you, Priyanka, and thank you everyone for typing in your words. I'm glad that the word action caught your attention, and that also kind of speaks to the path that you all have chosen to take with my first slide of what Rachel Carson said. Thank you so much. That gives us all a lot of hope. Yes.
With that, we also open the floor for question and answer. So if any of the participants would like to ask anything, they can just raise their hand and unmute themselves and ask. Even if it is related to your respective abstracts, your topics, you're more than welcome to share or ask anything related to that as well. So please feel free to do so. If you're not able to mute, you can just put it in the Q&A or the chat box as well. Okay. Deepanita ji has a question to ask. Deepanita ji, can you unmute and ask the question?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to know that this is regarding the abstract. So firstly, since I'm looking at gender and commons and from a practitioner's lens, like I had already mentioned, so what would be a framework or what would be the framework if there is any existing framework to look at it? Because I'm not focusing, I'm focusing on very micro level incidents or case studies or in these reports that these organizations have given on their experience of working with communities, or that I would be focusing on based on my experience of working with communities. But what could be an overarching framework if there's any suggestion on that? And secondly, I wanted also clarification regarding the presentation. What exactly is the expectation with regard to context or like the content and the how long it should be and what all it should definitely cover if the organizers should also help with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deepanita. I'll take the first one, and with respect to the presentation, probably Priyanka can share. So, with respect to the commons and gender, I think it will be good to see at least a couple of states' policy on, the land-related acts. So I know states, from state to state, things differ. For example, in Karnataka, the district collector has all the power to determine whether a particular piece of land can be diverted or not. The commons, particularly the grazing pastures, can be diverted or not, whereas it differs slightly in Telangana and other states. So if you look at that, and if you also look at the various schemes and policies that offer women from the pastoral communities to take a loan and buy sheep and goat and other grazing animals, there will be such a mismatch, because on one side you're promoting women to do this activity, and on the other side you're taking away the land. So where will she take these animals to graze? And buying fodder is not easy, because one truckload of fodder costs really 6,000 to 8,000 rupees. So it just defeats the purpose of what is being done in the name of women and gender, right? So these are areas that you may want to look, and also depending on how micro level you want to go in the areas, geographical areas you've selected, there also you can just see the existing number of animals and the existing number of commons. This should be available in public domain, so it should be easy. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Priyanka, you want to talk about how long the presentation should be next week?
Yes, ma'am, surely. So the presentation next week has to be about 3 to 5 minutes. That would be generally like maybe 5 to 7 slides. 3 to 5 slides is also fine. It has to be related to your apps. It is to be about your abstract, the topic that you chose, and the abstract that you submitted. And the timing is 3 to 5 minutes. So according to that, you can prepare. And those who have not submitted the abstract, kindly submit it if anybody's abstract is pending. Other than that, for those who want to continue this further as a research essay, the deadline is 11th of July. You can also write to us to express an interest in converting this into a research essay. That would also work very well. And the rest of the instructions about the research guidelines and the writing styles and everything is given in the guidelines document. So you can just go through that for that one. Do we have any other question or anybody who would like to discuss their abstract? Tanisha ji, do you have, would you like to discuss your abstract or do you have any questions regarding that? All right. Anybody else in the participants, if they would like to ask, please go ahead. Next session, we'll be having the presentation, so kindly be prepared with that. Okay. It seems we do not have any active questions now, ma'am. With that, ma'am, would you like to give some closing remarks and should we proceed with the formal vote of thanks after that?
Yeah, I think it was a great 2 hours spent very meaningfully. First of all, hearing Niti talk about the actions, and then Professor Patel discuss about women's movement and the state of affairs in the context of women and children. And with me walking all our participants through a variety of projects that are coming up and what's happening to the environmental laws and what are the ways forward, I think kind of gave enough food for thought for the weekend and to prepare for their own presentations next week. So I would like to thank everybody for staying so long and also wishing them a great weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With that, I think I'll proceed with the formal word of thanks for the day. All right. So as we come to the end of day 7 of EPAYF, Environment Policy and Action Youth Fellowship, an online international summer school program, a 2-month online immersive introductory leadership certificate training fellowship program, I, Prankanigi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for the day 7 sessions, Mr. Nityanand Jayaraman ji, Ms. Bhargavi S. Rao ji, and Professor Vibhuti Patel ji for taking out their valuable time and allowing us to learn from this online certificate program. We thank our chair, Bhargavi ma'am, for convening all the sessions. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you next Saturday on June 29th for our last day of the certification course. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join us in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning events. Wishing you a very good evening and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.